Please let me in, I beg you. Our son is my child too, Tavlin.
What would you do if the person you loved most in this world looked you dead in the eye and told you they could never trust you again? What if your own fear, your own insecurity, became the very thing that destroyed the only real love you'd ever known? And what if, after all the damage was done, after the lies you told yourself, after the walls you built so high that no one could climb them, a 9-month-old baby gave you a second chance you didn't deserve? One word, just one single word from a child who had never spoken before, and everything changed. Let me ask you something, and I want you to be honest with yourself. Have you ever pushed someone away, not because you didn't love them, but because you were terrified they would leave you first? Have you ever let someone else's voice get inside your head and poison the way you saw the person standing right in front of you? Have you ever looked back at a relationship and realized, with gut-wrenching clarity, that the person you accused of betraying you was actually the one who loved you most? If any of that hits close to home, then this story was made for you. Here's the truth. Nobody wants to admit. Sometimes we are the villains in our own love stories. Sometimes the monster isn't the other person. It's the fear living inside us. It's the childhood wounds we never healed. It's the voice of a parent, a past lover, or a painful memory whispering that we're not worthy of being loved. So we sabotage the very thing we crave most. And by the time we realize what we've done, the door has already closed. The person we hurt has already walked away, and we're left standing alone, wondering how we let it all slip through our fingers. But what if I told you that some doors can be reopened? What if I told you that redemption doesn't always come in the form you expect? That sometimes. Healing arrives through the smallest voice, the tiniest hands, the most innocent heart. Today's story will take you through heartbreak and healing, through betrayal and forgiveness, through the kind of pain that breaks you open and the kind of love that puts you back together. There is a moment in this story, one single moment, that will stop you in your tracks. You'll feel it when it comes, and you won't forget it. Welcome back to Mr. Roman's Story Vault, and if you're new here, welcome to the family. Before we begin, if you believe in second chances and the redemptive power of love, hit that subscribe button right now and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story. Now, let's begin. Rain hammered against the windshield of the black Bentley Continental as it rolled slowly into the modest neighborhood of Riverside Heights in Atlanta, Georgia. The streets were quiet. Porch lights flickered through the downpour. Working-class homes lined both sides of the road, small but dignified, with chain-link fences and children's bicycles left out on lawns. This was not the kind of neighborhood where a $4 billion man belonged. And yet, here he was, Mercer Holloway, founder and CEO of Holloway Technologies, one of the most powerful men in the American tech industry, sat behind the wheel of his luxury vehicle, gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles had gone white. His jaw was clenched. His grey eyes were fixed on a small rental house at the end of the block. A single light glowed from inside. She was home. He shouldn't have been there. His lawyers had told him to stay away. His business partner, a man who had known him for 15 years, had practically begged him to let the legal team handle this situation. "You're too emotional," Marcus had said. "You'll make things worse." But Mercer had never been the type of man to let others fight his battles. He hadn't built an empire by sitting back and waiting for permission. He hadn't clawed his way from a broken home to a penthouse suite by playing it safe. No, Mercer Holloway handled his own problems. And this was the biggest problem of his life. Because inside that small house, just 50 feet from where he sat, was the woman who had walked out on him 18 months ago without so much as a real goodbye. Tavlin Mitchell. Even now, her name did something to his chest. It tightened. It burned. It made him feel like he couldn't breathe. 18 months. That's how long it had been since he'd seen her face. 18 months since she'd packed a small suitcase while he was at work, left a note on his kitchen counter, and vanished from his life. The note had been short. brutal in its simplicity. "I can't do this anymore. Please don't look for me. T." He'd read those words 100 times. 1,000. He'd analyzed every letter, every curve of her handwriting, searching for some hidden meaning, some clue that would explain why the woman he loved had abandoned him without warning. For 3 months after she left, Mercer had tried to convince himself that he was fine, that she was just another relationship that hadn't worked out, that he was better off alone anyway. He always had been. Love was a liability. Attachment was weakness. His father had taught him that lesson when he was 12 years old, and he'd never forgotten it. So he buried himself in work. He closed a $2 billion acquisition. He expanded into European markets. He filled every waking hour with meetings and conference calls and spreadsheets. Anything to drown out the silence in his penthouse apartment. But he couldn't drown out the emptiness. He couldn't stop reaching for her in the middle of the night, only to find cold sheets where her warmth used to be. He couldn't stop hearing her laughter echoing through rooms she would never enter again. 8 months ago, his private investigator had delivered news that changed everything. Tavlin was pregnant. Not just pregnant, she had already given birth to a baby boy, and based on the timeline, there was only one possible father. Mercer had stared at the photographs for hours, grainy images taken from a distance, but clear enough to see what mattered. A beautiful baby with brown skin, Tavlin's skin, and grey eyes. His son. In that moment, something inside Mercer had cracked wide open. Every wall he'd built, every defense mechanism he'd constructed over 37 years of protecting himself, all of it crumbled in the face of that photograph. He had a child, a son he'd never held, a son he'd never even known existed. He had tried to reach out. God, how he had tried. He called Tavlin's phone. The number was disconnected. He sent emails. They bounced back. He showed up at her mother's house in Savannah, only to have the door slammed in his face. Word came through her mother, cold and final. Tavlin wanted nothing from him. Not his money, not his name, not his presence in her life or the life of her child. She had made that clear when she named the baby. Lennox Mitchell, not Lennox Holloway. Mitchell. She had erased him, written him out of his own son's story before the story had even begun. That was what had finally broken through his pride. That was what had put him in this car, on this rainy Wednesday night, parked outside her house like a man with nothing left to lose. Because maybe that's exactly what he was. Mercer took a deep breath, opened the car door, and stepped out into the rain. He was done waiting for permission. He was done playing by rules that had gotten him nowhere. Tonight, he would get his answers, one way or another, to understand how they ended up here. Two people who once loved each other standing on opposite sides of an unbridgeable divide. You have to go back to the beginning. 3 years earlier, San Francisco, a technology conference at one of the city's premier convention centers. Mercer had been there as the keynote speaker, scheduled to present his company's latest innovations to an audience of investors and industry leaders. It was the kind of event he could do in his sleep, smile for the cameras, shake the right hands, deliver a polished presentation that would drive his stock price up another 3 points. He was standing in the hallway outside Conference Room B, 20 minutes before his presentation, when he noticed a problem. The audio system was malfunctioning. Feedback squealed through the speakers. His microphone wasn't syncing with the display screens. For a man who demanded perfection in every aspect of his life, this was unacceptable. He spotted a young woman rushing past, dark brown skin, natural hair pulled back in, a practical bun, a headset pressed to her ear, and a tablet clutched in her hands. She wore the uniform of the venue staff, and she moved with the hurried efficiency of someone managing a dozen crises at once. "Excuse me," Mercer said, stepping into her path. "The audio system in Conference Room B is completely dysfunctional. I'm presenting in 20 minutes, and I need this resolved immediately." The woman stopped. She looked up at him, really looked at him, and something flickered in her brown eyes. Not recognition, exactly, more like assessment. She was sizing him up, measuring whether he was worth her already stretched time. "Sir, I'm aware of the issue," she said. her voice professional but clipped. "We have a technician en route. It will be resolved in 10 minutes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have 17 other emergencies that require my attention." She walked away before he could respond. Mercer stood there, mouth half open, utterly stunned. Nobody talked to him like that. Nobody dismissed him so casually. He was Mercer Holloway. He was worth billions. People bent over backward to accommodate him, to please him, to earn even a moment of his attention. This woman had looked at him like he was just another problem on her very long list. He found himself smiling. Her name, he learned later, was Tavlin Mitchell. She was 28 years old, an event coordinator who had been working in the hospitality industry for 6 years. She was good at her job, exceptional, actually, and she had zero patience for entitled executives who thought their problems were more important than everyone else's. Over the next 3 days of the conference, Mercer invented excuse after excuse to seek her out. A problem with the catering, a question about the venue's parking structure, a concern about the temperature in the very important person lounge. Each time, Tavlin handled his inquiries with polite professionalism and barely concealed impatience. Each time, he walked away more intrigued than before. On the final night of the conference, Mercer found her on the rooftop terrace of the convention center. She was alone. Her shoes were off, her feet dangling over the edge of a decorative fountain. Her headset was gone, her tablet nowhere in sight. She looked smaller somehow, without all her professional armor. More vulnerable. She was crying. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks, and she wiped at them quickly when she heard his footsteps approaching. She stood up, her professional mask sliding back into place. "Mr. Holloway, I apologize. This is unprofessional. I'll just stay," he said. The words surprised them both. He walked over and sat down beside her on the edge of the fountain, his $3,000 Italian shoes inches from the water. She stared at him like he'd lost his mind. "What happened?" he asked quietly. Maybe it was the exhaustion. Maybe it was the darkness that made strangers feel safe. Maybe it was the fact that she'd been holding everything together for so long that she simply couldn't hold it anymore. Tavlin told him everything. She told him about her grandmother, Opal, who had just been diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer. Grandma Opal had raised Tavlin after her father left and her mother struggled with addiction. That woman was everything to her, her foundation, her North Star. She told him about the 3 jobs she was working to help pay for the treatments that insurance wouldn't cover, about the medical bills piling up on her kitchen table, about the constant, gnawing fear that she was going to lose the only person who had ever truly believed in her. She told him about feeling like she was running on a treadmill that only moved faster the harder she pushed, about the loneliness of being strong for everyone else while having no one to be strong for her. Mercer listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't offer solutions or money or empty platitudes. When she finished, he simply said, "That sounds incredibly heavy. I'm sorry you're carrying it alone." Tavlin looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time. "You're not what I expected," she whispered. "Neither are you," he replied. Their first kiss happened there, on that rooftop, with the San Francisco skyline glittering behind them and the weight of their respective worlds pressing down on their shoulders. It was soft, tentative, a question neither of them knew how to answer, but it was a beginning. Their first real date happened the following week. Mercer flew from San Francisco to Atlanta, not for business, not for a meeting, but simply to take Tavlin to dinner. A 5-hour flight for a 3-hour meal. She'd called him crazy. He'd called it a solid investment. From that night forward, they were inseparable. It wasn't easy. Nothing about their relationship was easy. Mercer lived in a world of private jets and penthouse apartments, of galas, and board meetings and people who measured worth in zeros on a bank statement. Tavlin lived paycheck to paycheck, counting every dollar, stretching every resource. The whispers started almost immediately. On his side, the judgment was ruthless. His business associates smiled politely to Tavlin's face while questioning Mercer's judgment behind closed doors. His mother, Judith, made no effort to hide her disdain. "She's not one of us," Judith said at their first meeting. "She's charming, I'm sure, but charm fades. What's left when it does? On Tavlin's side, the accusations were equally painful. Some of her friends looked at her differently. "You're dating a billionaire now?" one had said, the words dripping with something that sounded like betrayal. "Must be nice to have someone else pay your bills." Tavlin didn't let Mercer pay her bills. That was one of the first boundaries she set, and one she never wavered on. She continued working her jobs. She continued sending money for Grandma Opal's treatments. She refused every gift that felt like charity, accepting only what she could reciprocate in some way. Mercer respected her for it, more than she knew. In a world where everyone wanted something from him, Tavlin wanted nothing but his time, his presence, his truth. They built their own world, separate from the noise outside. Late-night phone calls that lasted until sunrise, weekend trips to nowhere special, a cabin in the mountains, a beach in South Carolina, places where nobody knew his name or cared about his net worth. Mercer discovered that Tavlin was brilliant. She had ideas about customer experience, about hospitality, about building loyalty that could revolutionize industries. When he offered to fund her own consulting business, she refused, but she appreciated that he saw her as more than just his girlfriend. He saw her as a mind, a partner, an equal. Tavlin discovered that beneath Mercer's cold exterior was a man drowning in fear. Fear of being used, fear of being abandoned, fear of loving someone who would eventually reveal that they were only there for his money. She learned about his father, a man who had walked out when Mercer was 12, taking a significant portion of the family savings and leaving Mercer's mother to rebuild from nothing. That abandonment had shaped everything about who Mercer became. Every wall he built, every test he administered to the people who got close to him, it all traced back to that 12-year-old boy watching his father's car disappear down the driveway. After 12 months together, they moved in together. Mercer's penthouse, but decorated with Tavlin's touches. Warm colors, family photographs, the smell of her cooking filling rooms that had always felt empty before. They talked about marriage. They talked about children. They talked about building a life that merged their two worlds into something new. One night, a power outage knocked out the entire building. No lights, no television, no distractions. They lit candles and sat on the living room floor, and they talked until the sun came up. About their fears, about their dreams, about the people they wanted to become. That night, Mercer told Tavlin he loved her. Not casually, not in passing, but looking directly into her eyes, holding her hands in his voice breaking with the weight of it. "I've never said this to anyone," he admitted. "I've never let myself feel this. But I love you, Tavlin, more than I thought I was capable of." She told him she loved him too. 3 weeks later, Grandma Opal met Mercer for the first time. She was frail by then, weakened by chemotherapy, but her eyes were still sharp. She studied Mercer for a long moment before speaking. "You love my granddaughter?" "Yes, Mom. More than anything." "Then prove it. Not with your money. That's easy. Prove it with your patience, with your trust, with your presence when things get hard." Mercer had promised he would. It was a promise he would eventually break in the most devastating way possible. But in that moment, in those 18 months of building something beautiful, neither of them could have predicted how it would end. They thought they had found their forever. They were wrong. The cracks in paradise began with a dinner invitation. Judith Holloway had demanded really, that Mercer bring Tavlin to her home in Connecticut for Sunday dinner. It was framed as an olive branch, a chance for the family to get to know this woman who had captured her son's heart. Tavlin had been nervous. She'd spent hours choosing the right outfit, something elegant but not trying too hard, sophisticated but not pretentious. She brought flowers for Judith and a bottle of wine that cost more than she could comfortably afford. None of it mattered. From the moment they walked through the door of Judith's colonial estate, Tavlin could feel the frost in the air. Judith's smile never reached her eyes. Her compliments were wrapped in thorns. "What a lovely dress. So bold of you to wear something so vibrant." The dinner itself was an exercise in endurance. Judith asked questions that sounded polite, but carried venom underneath. Where did Tavlin grow up? What did her parents do for a living? Had she always worked in event coordination, or did she have other ambitions? Each answer seemed to confirm something in Judith's mind, though Tavlin couldn't quite name what. The breaking point came over dessert. Judith had excused the household staff, leaving just the three of them at the long dining table. She set down her wineglass, looked directly at Tavlin, and spoke with the casual cruelty of someone who believed she was stating obvious facts. "I'm sure you're a perfectly nice girl, dear. But let's be honest with each other. You're not one of us. You come from a different world, a world with different values, different expectations. Women like you look at men like my son and see a winning lottery ticket. I don't blame you for it. It's simply human nature." The silence that followed was deafening. Tavlin felt the words hit her like physical blows. She opened her mouth to respond, but no sound came out. 18 months of loving Mercer, 18 months of refusing his money and working her own jobs and proving through every action that she wasn't what people assumed, and here was his mother reducing her to a stereotype in 3 sentences. Mercer's reaction was immediate. His chair scraped back against the hardwood floor. His voice was cold in a way Tavlin had never heard before. "Mother, that's enough. I'm only saying what everyone is thinking, darling. Someone needs to protect you from—" "I said enough." He took Tavlin's hand and led her out of the dining room, out of the house, into the cool Connecticut night. They drove in silence for 20 minutes before he pulled over on a quiet road. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice tight with anger. "I'm so sorry." She had no right. "It's fine," Tavlin whispered, though it wasn't fine. It was the furthest thing from fine. "It's not fine, and I'm going to make sure she understands that." He drove Tavlin back to their hotel, then turned around and went back to his mother's house. Tavlin never knew exactly what was said during that conversation, but Mercer returned 2 hours later looking exhausted and grim. "I told her if she ever speaks to you that way again, she will no longer be welcome in my life," he said. "You are my priority, not her outdated prejudices." Tavlin wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust that his words meant more than his mother's poison. But here's the thing about poison. It doesn't need to be swallowed to do damage. Sometimes it just needs to be introduced into the bloodstream. A single drop is enough. Given time, it spreads. Judith Holloway understood this better than anyone. Over the following months, she never again openly attacked Tavlin. She was smarter than that. Instead, she worked in smaller doses. A raised eyebrow when Tavlin mentioned her work, a casual comment about an article she'd read regarding women who targeted wealthy men, an offhand remark about how Mercer's father had also been blinded by passion before he showed his true colors. "I'm not saying she's like him," Judith would say, her tone dripping with false innocence. "I'm just saying you should be careful. You've always trusted too easily, Mercer. It's your one weakness." Mercer defended Tavlin every time. He pushed back against his mother's insinuations. He told himself he wasn't affected by her words. But the seed had been planted, deep in the soil of his subconscious, in the place where his father's abandonment had left permanent scars. A tiny root of doubt began to grow. He started noticing things he'd never noticed before. The way Tavlin admired jewelry in store windows. The way she sometimes paused at designer storefronts. The way she'd mentioned once that she'd never been able to afford nice things growing up. None of these observations meant anything. Tavlin had never asked him for a single material possession. But Mercer's wounded mind began connecting dots that weren't there, building a case against the woman he loved without even realizing he was doing it. Tavlin sensed the shift. She couldn't name it, couldn't point to any specific moment, but something between them had changed. There was a hesitation in Mercer's eyes that hadn't been there before, a distance that appeared without explanation. She confided in Grandma Opal during one of her visits to Atlanta. The cancer treatments were working, Opal was in remission now, but she was still fragile, still fighting. "He loves you," Opal said, her weathered hand covering Tavlin's. "I could see it in his eyes when he looked at you. But love isn't always enough, baby." "What do you mean?" Opal was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. A man who can't stand up to his mama, really stand up to her, not just in the moment but in his heart, will never truly stand by his woman. If he's got one foot in her world and one foot in yours, eventually he's going to have to choose. You need to ask yourself, when that choice comes, which way is he going to fall? Tavlin didn't have an answer. She was about to find out. The headline appeared on a Tuesday morning. From rags to riches, event planner strikes gold with billionaire beau. Accompanying the article were photographs, paparazzi shots of Tavlin shopping on Rodeo Drive, walking out of luxury stores, with bags in her hands, a credit card in her wallet that the magazine had identified as belonging to Mercer Holloway. The article painted a devastating portrait. A working-class woman from Georgia had landed herself a billionaire boyfriend and was now living the high life on his dime. Anonymous sources described shopping sprees and lavish spending. The implication was clear. Tavlin Mitchell was exactly what people like Judith Holloway had always warned about. What the article didn't mention, what the photographers and the gossip writers and the anonymous sources didn't know, was why Tavlin had been on Rodeo Drive that day. It was 3 weeks before Mercer's birthday. For months, Tavlin had been planning the perfect gift. Mercer had everything money could buy. There was nothing she could purchase that he couldn't purchase 1,000 times over. So she had looked for something that couldn't be bought. Something with meaning. During one of their late-night conversations, Mercer had mentioned his father. Not the abandonment, but a moment before it. A rare, good memory. When Mercer was 10 years old, his father had promised him a vintage watch for his 18th birthday. A 1965 Omega Seamaster, the same model his grandfather had worn. "When you're a man," his father had said, "this will be yours." His father had left before that birthday ever came. The watch had never materialized. The promise had become just another broken thing. Tavlin had spent 6 months tracking down that exact watch, a 1965 Omega Seamaster in pristine condition. She'd found one, finally, at a vintage dealer in Los Angeles. The price was staggering, more than she made in a year. She couldn't afford it on her own. So she'd done the one thing she'd sworn never to do. She'd used Mercer's credit card. The card he'd given her for emergencies, the one she'd never once touched. She planned to pay him back, every cent, even if it took years. She'd already started setting aside money. The watch would be a surprise, a gift that said, "I see you, I hear you, I want to heal this old wound." Instead, it became evidence of her supposed betrayal. Mercer was already home when Tavlin returned from work that evening. She found him standing in the living room, the magazine open in his hands, his face carved from stone. "Mercer, what's wrong?" He didn't answer. He simply held up the magazine, the headline facing her. Tavlin's heart stopped. "I can explain." Quite the shopping spree. His voice was ice. No warmth, no room for explanation. Just cold, hard judgment. Rodeo Drive, designer stores, my credit card, the one you said you'd never use. "Mercer, please, just listen to me." "I'm listening. I've been listening to everyone who told me to be careful, everyone who warned me that this was too good to be true." He laughed bitterly. "I defended you. Every single time, I defended you. I told my mother she was wrong about you. I told myself I could trust you. You can trust me." Tavlin's voice broke. "That shopping trip, it was for your birthday. I was buying you a gift. A gift." His tone dripped with disbelief. "A gift that required my credit card and multiple luxury stores. It was a vintage watch, Mercer. The same one your father promised you. I've been planning it for months." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes. Doubt, hesitation, the possibility that he was wrong. But the poison was too deep now. His mother's voice was too loud in his head. His father's betrayal was too fresh in his bones, even after 25 years. "And I'm supposed to believe that?" The words came out cruel, dismissive. Tavlin stared at him. The man she loved. The man she had defended to her friends, her family, even herself. The man she had given 18 months of her life, asking nothing in return except his heart. And he didn't believe her. He couldn't believe her. Because somewhere along the way, he had decided that she was guilty. that everyone was guilty. That love was just another con, and he was the mark. "I have never asked you for anything," Tavlin said, her voice trembling with fury and heartbreak. "Not once in 18 months. I pay my own bills, I work my own jobs, I take care of my own family. The only thing I have ever wanted from you was your love, and apparently even that comes with conditions." "Everyone has an angle," Mercer shot back. "Everyone wants something. My father taught me that lesson a long time ago." "I am not your father." The words echoed through the penthouse. Tavlin was crying now, hot, angry tears streaming down her face. "I'm not your father. I'm not whatever woman you've been waiting for me to become. I'm just Tavlin. I'm just the woman who loves you, who has loved you through everything, who has never given you a single reason to doubt me." Mercer said nothing. "But if that's not enough," she continued, her voice breaking, "if you're always going to be standing there waiting for me to prove your worst fears right, then maybe I shouldn't be here at all." She waited. She gave him a chance. One moment to step forward, one word to pull her back from the edge. But Mercer Holloway, in his pride and his fear and his deeply rooted inability to be vulnerable, said nothing. That silence spoke louder than any accusation. Tavlin turned and walked to the bedroom. She packed a small suitcase, just the essentials, just enough to leave. Her hands shook the entire time. When she returned to the living room, Mercer hadn't moved. He stood exactly where she'd left him, the magazine still clutched in his hands, his face unreadable. She walked to the kitchen counter and wrote a note, 8 words that would haunt him for months. "I can't do this anymore. Please don't look for me. T." She left the note on the marble surface, walked past him without another word, and closed the door behind her. The vintage watch, the 1965 Omega Seamaster, the gift that was supposed to heal his oldest wound, remained in its velvet box at the bottom of her suitcase. He would never know what she had done for him. He would never know what he had destroyed. Story Vault family. If you've ever been misunderstood by someone you loved, if you've ever had your good intentions twisted into something ugly, type "I felt this" in the comments below. And if you're feeling this heartbreak right now, hit that like button. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for what happens next. Let's continue. 3 weeks after Tavlin walked out of his penthouse, Mercer Holloway finally stopped moving. He had spent those 21 days in constant motion, meetings, calls, acquisitions, anything to fill the silence that followed him from room to room. He worked 18-hour days. He slept on the couch in his office. He avoided the penthouse entirely because every corner held a memory of her. But on the 22nd day, he came home. He walked through the front door and stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by all the things money could buy: the designer furniture, the original artwork, the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. None of it mattered. Without Tavlin, this place was just an expensive tomb. He found himself walking to the kitchen, to the spot where she'd left her note. The paper was gone. He'd thrown it away in a fit of anger, but he could still see her handwriting in his mind. "I can't do this anymore." For the first time since she left, Mercer allowed himself to feel the full weight of what he'd done. He had accused her, condemned her, looked into the eyes of the woman who had loved him unconditionally, and told her, through his silence, that she was no different from his father. But she was different. She had always been different. The shopping trip, the credit card, the stores on Rodeo Drive. His birthday was in 3 weeks. She had said it was a gift, a vintage watch. The same one his father had promised him. Mercer sank onto the kitchen floor, his back against the cold marble counter, and did something he hadn't done since he was 12 years old. He wept. Meanwhile, in a small apartment in Atlanta, Tavlin Mitchell was staring at a different kind of evidence. 2 pink lines on a plastic stick. She sat on the edge of her bathtub, the pregnancy test trembling in. Her hands, her mind refusing to process what her eyes were seeing. Pregnant. She was pregnant. The timing was undeniable. This was Mercer's child. Conceived during their last good weeks together, before his mother's poison had fully taken root, before the magazine article, before everything fell apart. For a long moment, Tavlin couldn't breathe. The walls of the tiny bathroom seemed to close in around her. She was alone. She had no job lined up in Atlanta, just savings that would run out within months. She was 30 years old, single, and carrying the child of a man who had looked at her like she was a con artist. Terror gripped her chest with cold fingers. She couldn't do this. She couldn't raise a child alone. She couldn't. But even as the fear threatened to overwhelm her, another voice spoke up, quieter, steadier, a voice that sounded remarkably like Grandma Opal. You can do hard things, baby. You've been doing hard things your whole life. Tavlin closed her eyes and pressed a hand to her still flat stomach. She could do this. She would do this. But first, she had to make a decision. For 3 days, Tavlin debated whether to tell Mercer. Part of her wanted to call him. Despite everything, despite the accusations and the cruelty and the way he'd shattered her heart, part of her still believed in the man she'd fallen in love with. The man who had sat beside her on that rooftop in San Francisco and simply listened. The man who had promised Grandma Opal he would prove his love through patience and trust and presence. That man deserved to know he was going to be a father. But every time Tavlin reached for her phone, the memory of his face stopped her cold. And I'm supposed to believe that. Everyone has an angle. My father taught me that lesson. She could already hear how that conversation would go. Mercer would demand a paternity test. He would assume she had gotten pregnant on purpose, that this was another manipulation, another scheme to trap him and his money. His mother would be in his ear within hours, confirming every suspicion. And even if he eventually accepted the truth, even if the test proved what Tavlin already knew, what then? Would he ever trust her? Would he ever look at their child without a shadow of doubt in his eyes? Would she spend the rest of her life defending herself against accusations that should never have been made? No. Tavlin made her decision on a Thursday morning, sitting on her mother's porch with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. I'm not going to tell him, she said quietly. Her mother, Denise, looked at her for a long moment. Denise Mitchell had lived through her own heartbreaks, a husband who'd walked out, years of struggling, to stay clean, the slow work of rebuilding trust with the daughter she'd nearly lost. She understood the weight of difficult choices. Are you sure? Denise asked. He's the father. He has a right to know. He has a right, Tavlin agreed. But so does this baby, and I refuse to raise my child in a home where love comes with conditions, where every action is questioned, every motive suspected, where Daddy is always waiting for Mommy to prove she's the villain he's already decided she is. Denise was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was gentle. You're not keeping this baby from his father out of spite, are you? No, Mama. Tavlin's hand moved to her stomach. I'm protecting us both from repeating a cycle of pain. If Mercer ever becomes a man who can love without fear, who can trust without conditions, if he ever does the work to heal those wounds, then maybe things will be different. But right now, he's not capable of being the father this child deserves. Denise nodded slowly. Then we do this together, you and me and that grandbaby. We'll figure it out. For the first time in weeks, Tavlin felt something other than fear. The months that followed were the hardest of Tavlin's life, and the most transformative. She moved in with her mother temporarily, then found a small rental house in Riverside Heights. She took freelance consulting work when she could find it, building slowly toward the business she'd always dreamed of. Every dollar was accounted for. Every expense was planned. The loneliness was overwhelming at times. Pregnancy was supposed to be shared, ultrasounds and late-night cravings, and the first flutter of movement. Instead, Tavlin experienced it alone. She went to every doctor's appointment by herself. She assembled the crib by herself. She painted the nursery a soft sage green and tried not to think about whose eyes her baby might inherit. There were moments when she almost broke down and called him. At her 20-week ultrasound, when the technician pointed to the screen and said, "It's a boy," Tavlin had to bite her lip to keep from sobbing. She wanted to turn to someone and share that joy. She wanted Mercer beside her, holding her hand, seeing their son for the first time. But he wasn't there. And that was his choice as much as hers. She named the baby Lennox. The name meant from the field of elm trees, strength and growth, resilience and roots. That's what she wanted for her son. She wanted him to grow strong. She wanted him to weather storms. She wanted him to know where he came from, while reaching always toward the sky. Lennox Mitchell, not Holloway. If Mercer wanted to claim this child, he would have to earn that right. The labor lasted 23 hours. 23 hours of contractions and breathing exercises, and nurses who were kind but could not replace the hand Tavlin wished was holding hers. 23 hours of pain and fear and determination. When it was finally over, when the doctor placed a screaming, red-faced, perfect baby boy in her arms, Tavlin forgot everything else. She forgot the betrayal. She forgot the heartbreak. She forgot the months of loneliness and the father who wasn't there. All she saw was her son. Grey eyes, Mercer's grey eyes, staring up at her with newborn intensity. Brown skin, her mother's cheekbones. A tiny chin that already looked stubborn. "Hi, Lennox," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "It's just you and me, baby boy, and I promise, I'm going to give you everything, all the love I have. Every single day." Lennox yawned and curled his tiny fingers around hers. It was enough. He was enough. 8 months later, Mercer's private investigator delivered photographs of a baby boy in Atlanta. 3 weeks after that, a Bentley pulled into Riverside Heights on a rainy Wednesday night, and everything was about to change. The rain had soaked through Mercer's designer coat by the time he reached the front door. He stood on the small concrete porch, water dripping from his hair, his heart pounding against his ribs like a caged animal fighting for freedom. The house before him was modest, a far cry from the penthouse they'd once shared. Faded blue shutters, a welcome mat that read, "Home Sweet Home," a child's toy truck abandoned on the porch steps, evidence of the life she'd built without him. Mercer raised his fist and knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the quiet neighborhood, cutting through the sound of falling rain. For a long moment, nothing happened. He was about to knock again when he heard footsteps approaching. The soft pad of bare feet on hardwood. A pause. She was looking through the peephole, he realized, seeing who had come to her door at 9 o'clock on a rainy Wednesday night. The deadbolt clicked. The door swung open. There she was. Tavlin Mitchell stood in the doorway, one hand gripping the doorframe, her body positioned as a barrier between him and the interior of her home. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt, her natural hair pulled up in a loose bun. No makeup, no pretense. She looked different. There were shadows under her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights that came with caring for an infant alone. But there was something else too, something that hadn't been there 18 months ago. Strength. Motherhood had given her a steadiness, a groundedness that seemed to radiate from her very core. She was tired, yes, but she was also unbreakable in a way she hadn't been before. For a moment, Mercer forgot all the arguments he'd rehearsed in the car. He forgot his righteous anger and his prepared speeches. He simply stared at the woman he had loved and lost, struck speechless by the sight of her. Tavlin's expression remained cold, guarded, a wall of ice where warmth used to be. "Mercer," her voice was flat. "I told you through my lawyer that I didn't want to see you, and I told you through mine that I'm not going away." He heard the edge in his own voice, frustration mixing with something raw, something he couldn't name. "We need to talk. We have nothing to talk about. We have a son." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with accusation and pain. Tavlin's jaw tightened. "I'm aware of what I have. What I don't have is any obligation to let you into my home." But Mercer was done with doors being closed in his face. He was done with lawyers and intermediaries and messages passed through third parties. He stepped forward, moving past her into the small living room before she could stop him. "You can't just walk into my house. Our son is my child too, Tavlin." His voice was louder than he intended, echoing off the walls of the modest living room. "You had no right to keep him from me, no right to name him Mitchell instead of Holloway, no right to cut me out of his life without so much as a conversation." Tavlin closed the front door, not to welcome him, but to keep their argument from reaching the neighbors' ears. her arms crossed over her chest, her posture defensive but unafraid. I had every right. Her voice was steady, controlled. You made your feelings perfectly clear the night I left. You don't trust me. You'll never trust me. And I refuse, I absolutely refuse, to raise my son in that kind of environment. So your solution was to kidnap him? To hide him from his own father? The word landed like a slap. Tavlin's eyes flashed with fury. Real fury. The kind that comes from a place of deep and justified wound. Kidnap? Her laugh was bitter, hollow. I carried that child for 9 months. I went through 23 hours of labor alone. 23 hours, Mercer. No one holding my hand. No one telling me I was doing a good job. No one there when he finally came into this world except strangers in scrubs. She stepped toward him, her voice rising with every word. I have fed him at 3 in the morning when I was so exhausted I could barely see straight. I have held him through fevers and nightmares and colic that lasted for weeks. I have been his mother, his father, his everything, every single day since he was born. Don't you dare stand in my house and throw around words like kidnap. Mercer felt her words hit him like physical blows, each one landing in the soft places he tried to protect, each one carrying a weight of truth he couldn't deny. But his pride, that stubborn, wounded pride that had gotten him into this mess in the first place, wouldn't let him back down. I would have been there, he said, his voice cracking despite his efforts to keep it steady. If you had just told me, if you had given me a chance. Would you? Tavlin cut him off, her eyes boring into his. Would you really? Let's be honest with each other, Mercer. If I had called you 18 months ago and told you I was pregnant, what would you have done? He opened his mouth to respond, but she didn't let him. You would have assumed I did it on purpose. You would have thought it was a trap, another scheme from the gold-digging girlfriend your mother warned you about. You would have demanded a paternity test before you'd even look at me. Before. You'd let yourself believe for 1 second that I was telling the truth. Her voice broke on the last word, but she pushed through. Don't pretend you would have been some loving, supportive partner. We both know that's not who you were. Silence filled the room. Mercer wanted to argue. He wanted to defend himself, to insist that he would have been different, that he would have stepped up and done the right thing. But the truth was a mirror he couldn't look away from. 18 months ago, he would have done exactly what she described. Every single thing. His mind would have gone to the darkest interpretation. His mother's voice would have been in his ear, whispering about women who use pregnancy as leverage. He would have treated the mother of his child like a suspect rather than a partner. Tavlin was right, and that knowledge burned worse than any accusation she could have thrown at him. What she didn't know, what he hadn't yet found the words to tell her, was that he wasn't the same man who had let her walk out of his life. 6 months of therapy had forced him to confront truths about himself that he'd spent a lifetime avoiding. He had done the work. He had faced his demons. He had changed. But how could he prove that? How could he make her see what he had only recently begun to see himself? Before he could find an answer, a sound came from the hallway. Small, soft, a baby's COO. Both of them froze. Tavlin's head turned toward the sound, her expression shifting from anger to concern. "He's supposed to be asleep," she murmured, already moving toward the hallway. "He usually doesn't wake up at this hour. The yelling must have—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. The implication was clear. Their argument had disturbed their son. Their son. Mercer's heart hammered in his chest as he followed her without asking permission. His legs moved of their own accord, carrying him toward a doorway painted, soft sage green, toward the room where his child, was waiting. Tavlin pushed open the nursery door, and Mercer stepped in behind her. The room was small but filled with love. A white crib stood against one wall, surrounded by stuffed animals and a mobile of soft fabric stars. A rocking chair sat in the corner, a well-worn blanket draped over its arm. Children's books lined a small shelf. The walls were decorated with hand-painted letters, spelling out a name. Lenno Zanti. Mercer's breath caught in his throat. Standing in the crib, his chubby fingers wrapped around the wooden bars, was the most beautiful thing Mercer Holloway had ever seen. The baby was small, 9 months old, according to the investigators' reports, but he stood with a confidence that seemed impossible for his age. He wore pajamas covered in tiny dinosaurs, and his curly hair stuck up, in wild tufts around his head, evidence of sleep recently disturbed. But it was his eyes that stopped Mercer's heart. Grey, the exact shade of grey that stared back at Mercer every morning in the mirror. His eyes, his son had his eyes. "Oh, baby," Tavlin said softly, reaching toward the crib. "Did the loud voices wake you up? Mama's sorry. Mama's so sorry." But Lennox wasn't looking at his mother. He was looking at Mercer. Those grey eyes, ancient and knowing in a face so young, studied the stranger who had entered his nursery. There was no fear in his gaze, no uncertainty, just a quiet intensity, as if he was trying to place a face he'd seen before but couldn't quite remember. Mercer took a slow step forward, terrified of frightening the child, terrified of breaking whatever fragile moment was building between them. "Hey there," he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. "Hey, little man." Lennox tilted his head, his tiny eyebrows furrowed in concentration. The room was silent, except for the rain still pattering against the window. Tavlin stood frozen, her hands still extended toward her son, watching this encounter unfold with an expression Mercer couldn't read. Lennox looked at Mercer for a long moment, studying, considering, making some decision that only he understood. His small mouth opened, and in a voice clear as a bell, he spoke his first word. "Dada." The sound cut through the room like a lightning bolt. Tavlin's hand flew to her mouth. Her eyes went wide with shock, genuine, overwhelming shock. "He's never—" Her voice was trembling. "He's never said that before. The doctor said he might be a late talker. He's never spoken at all, not once, not—" "Dada," Lennox said again, more insistent this time. He released the crib bars and reached his small arms toward Mercer, his intent unmistakable. He wanted to be held. He wanted his father. Something inside Mercer's chest cracked wide open. Every wall he had ever built, every defense mechanism he had constructed over 37 years of protecting himself from pain, every barrier that had kept him safe and alone and afraid, all of it crumbled in that single moment. Tears spilled down his cheeks. Tears he hadn't cried since he was 12 years old. Tears he had sworn he would never cry again. He moved forward without thinking, reaching into the crib and lifting his son into his arms. Lennox came to him easily, naturally, as if they had done this 1,000 times before. The baby settled against Mercer's chest with a contented sigh, his small body warm and solid and impossibly real. One tiny hand reached up and patted Mercer's tear-streaked cheek, as if to say, "It's okay. I'm here. Now." "We found each other." "Hi," Mercer whispered, his voice broken beyond repair. "Hi, Lennox. I'm your daddy. His voice gave out. He pressed his lips to his son's curly hair and tried again. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." Tavlin was crying now too. Silent tears tracked down her cheeks as she watched the man who had broken her heart hold their son for the first time. How did he know? She breathed. How could he possibly know? Mercer shook his head, unable to speak. But Tavlin looked at her son, at the way Lennox had recognized his father instantly, had spoken his first word, not for her but for this stranger who wasn't a stranger. And she understood something she had never told Mercer. Every night since Lennox was born, Tavlin had shown him photographs. She had pulled out her phone and scrolled through the pictures she'd never been able to delete. Photos of Mercer smiling, Mercer laughing, Mercer looking at her with love in his grey eyes. She had pointed to the screen and said, "That's your daddy, Lennox. That's your daddy." Not because she was planning a reunion, not because she had forgiven him, but because she believed, deep in her heart, that every child deserved to know where they came from. She had given Lennox his father's face, even when she couldn't give him his father's presence. And somehow, impossibly, it had been enough. "I showed him pictures," Tavlin admitted quietly, "every night. I wanted him to know your face, even if he never knew you. Mercer looked up at her, Lennox still nestled against his chest. The gratitude in his eyes was overwhelming. "Thank you," he whispered. "Thank you for that. You didn't have to, after everything I did." "He deserved to know," Tavlin said simply. "Whatever happened between us, he deserved to know his father's face." Lennox yawned against Mercer's chest, his small body growing heavy with returning sleep. But his fingers remained curled in the fabric of Mercer's shirt, holding on tight. Father and son, together for the first time. Perhaps blood recognized blood. Perhaps some connections ran deeper than circumstance or choice. Perhaps there were things in this world that simply couldn't be explained. But in that moment, none of the explanations mattered. What mattered was that Lennox had called for his father, and his father was finally here. The nursery was quiet now. Lennox had fallen back asleep in Mercer's arms, his breathing soft and even, his small hand still clutching his father's shirt. Mercer hadn't moved from where he stood, terrified that any shift would wake the baby, would break this spell. Tavlin had sunk onto the small daybed against the wall, her legs finally giving out after the emotional earthquake of the last hour. She watched Mercer hold their son, her face a complicated landscape of grief and wonder, and something that might have been hope. "He looks comfortable with you," she said quietly. "I'm terrified I'm going to drop him." Mercer's voice was barely above a whisper. "I've never held a baby before, not once in my life. You're doing fine." Silence stretched between them, but it was different now. The anger had drained away, leaving something raw underneath, something that needed to be said. Mercer spoke first. "I was wrong." Tavlin looked up at him. "Everything I accused you of, every doubt, every suspicion, every cruel word, I was wrong about all of it." He kept his eyes on Lennox, unable to face her directly. "I was terrified, Tavlin. I was so terrified of being hurt again that I pushed you away before you could leave me. Before you could prove that you were just like everyone else." He took a shaky breath. "But you weren't going to leave me, were you? Not until I made it impossible for you to stay." Tavlin was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was thick with unshed tears. "I loved you so much. That was the whole problem." She shook her head slowly. "I loved you more than I had ever loved anyone. I gave you everything I had, my trust, my heart, my future. And it still wasn't enough to make you believe in me. I know." The words were heavy with regret. "And I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect anything from you, Tavlin. I haven't earned the right to expect anything." He finally looked at her, his grey eyes, the same eyes that stared up at him from his son's face, filled with raw vulnerability. "But please, let me be in his life. Let me be his father. Not because I deserve it, I know I don't, but because he deserves a father who shows up. Let me prove to you that I can be the man you always saw in me, the man I didn't know how to be." Tavlin studied him for a long moment. The man standing before her was familiar and foreign all at once. The arrogance was gone. The coldness had thawed. Something had shifted in him, something fundamental. "You've changed," she said slowly. "I can see it, the way you're holding him, the way you're talking. You're different. I've been in therapy." The admission came out quietly, almost shamefully. "For 6 months, twice a week, working through everything. My father's abandonment, my trust issues, the way I hurt you." Tavlin's eyebrows rose. "Mercer Holloway, the man who thought asking for help was weakness, in therapy? I know it's not enough," he continued. "I know I'm not fixed. I'm not perfect. I'm probably never going to be perfect." He looked down at Lennox, his voice softening. "But I'm trying. For the first time in my life, I'm really trying to be better, to be different, to break the cycle that my father started." The room fell silent again. Tavlin absorbed his words, weighed them against all the pain of the past year. "I don't know if I can trust you again," she said finally. "Not completely. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I understand. It's not just about me anymore. It's about him." She nodded toward Lennox. "If you come into his life and then leave, if you hurt him the way you hurt me, I will never forgive you, Mercer. I mean that. I know." His voice was steady, certain, "and I'm not going anywhere." However long it takes for you to trust me, whether that's months or years or the rest of our lives, I'll earn it. Every single day, I'll earn it." Tavlin looked at her son, sleeping peacefully in his father's arms. She thought about all the nights she'd spent alone, all the milestones she'd celebrated without a partner, all the weight she'd carried by herself. She was tired. God, she was so tired. And for the first time in 18 months, she didn't have to carry it alone. "Stay," she said softly. "Just for tonight. He's comfortable with you, and if you try to put him down now, he'll wake up screaming. And She hesitated. "I'm too tired to fight anymore." Mercer nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Tavlin rose from the daybed and moved to the rocking chair, pulling the worn blanket over her legs. Mercer carefully lowered himself onto the daybed, Lennox still cradled against his chest. They sat in the dim nursery, surrounded by stuffed animals and children's books, while the rain continued to fall outside. Two people who had loved and lost and hurt each other beyond measure. Two people who didn't know if they could ever find their way back. But between them, breathing softly in his father's arms, was a child who had spoken his first word. Dada. A word that meant, "I know you. I claim you. You belong to me." For the first time in 18 months, neither Mercer nor Tavlin felt alone. Story Vault family, if that moment just hit you right in the heart, type Dada in the comments below. If you believe that children can heal wounds that seem completely unhealable, type miracles happen. We're almost at the end of this journey. Stay with me. The road to redemption is not walked in a single night. Mercer learned this truth in the days and weeks that followed his first meeting with Lennox. The moment their son spoke, his first word had broken something open between them, but broken things don't heal overnight, and trust destroyed takes far longer to rebuild than it did to shatter. 3 days after that rainy night, Mercer signed a lease on a modest 2-bedroom apartment exactly 3 blocks from Tavlin's house in Riverside Heights. Not with her. That would have been too fast, too reckless, too much pressure on something still too fragile to bear weight. But close enough to show up, close enough to be present, close enough to prove, through action rather than words, that he meant every promise he'd made. He showed up every morning at 7 o'clock to help with breakfast. He learned how to make Lennox's bottles at the exact temperature the baby preferred. He discovered that his son hated peas, but would eat sweet potatoes mixed with applesauce. He became an expert at changing diapers, at reading the same board book 17 times in a row, at making silly faces that produced the most beautiful sound in the world, Lennox's laughter. He attended every doctor's appointment, sitting in the waiting room with a diaper bag slung over his shoulder like he'd been doing it his whole life. He was there for the pediatrician visits, the vaccinations, the checkups. He took notes when the doctor spoke. He asked questions about developmental milestones and feeding schedules. When Lennox spiked a fever at 2 in the morning, Mercer's phone rang, and he was at Tavlin, his door within 5 minutes, still in his pajamas, ready to help however she needed. He was showing up. Every single day, he was showing up. Meeting Tavlin's mother again was harder than any business negotiation Mercer had ever conducted. The first Sunday dinner at Denise Mitchell's house happened 6 weeks after that rainy night. Mercer arrived with flowers and a sense of dread that made his palms sweat. Denise opened the door, looked him up and down with an expression that could have frozen hell itself, and said simply, "You're late." He was 3 minutes early. The meal was excruciating. Denise asked polite questions that landed like accusations. How was work? Was he finding time to be present for his son? Did he understand the difference between writing a check and actually being a father? Mercer answered honestly. He didn't make excuses. He didn't try to charm his way out of her judgment. He simply told the truth. He had failed her daughter. He knew it, and he was spending every day trying to be worthy of a second chance he didn't deserve. Denise watched him like a hawk studying prey. But over the following months, something shifted. Mercer kept showing up. He helped wash dishes after dinner. He fixed the loose railing on Denise's porch without being asked. He remembered her birthday, not with an expensive gift, but with a photo album he They'd put together of Lennox's first months, so she could keep the memories close. The day Denise called him son for the first time, Mercer had to excuse himself to the bathroom to compose himself. He stood in front of the mirror, gripping the sink, trying to understand why that single word from this woman meant more to him than any business award he'd ever received. Family. He was being welcomed into a family, not because of his money or his status, but because he was earning his place one day at a time. Mercer and Tavlin began couples therapy, even though they weren't technically a couple. Dr. Patricia Chen was a no-nonsense therapist in her 50s who had heard every excuse and didn't accept any of them. Her office was small and comfortable, filled with plants and soft lighting, designed to feel safe. "Why are you here?" she asked during their first session. "We have a son together," Mercer began. "And we're trying to—" "I asked why you're here, not why you think you should be here." Silence. Tavlin spoke first. "I'm here because I want to make sure we can co-parent without destroying each other, and without destroying him. And you, Doctor." Chen looked at Mercer. "I'm here because I want her back," Mercer said quietly. "And I know I have to earn that right." The work was brutal. They unpacked wounds that had festered for years. Mercer talked about his father's abandonment in ways he never had before. Not just the facts, but the feelings. The shame of not being enough to make his father stay. The belief that love was always conditional, always temporary, always one mistake away from vanishing. Tavlin talked about the pressure she'd felt, trying to prove she wasn't what everyone assumed. About the exhaustion of being tested constantly. About the pain of loving someone who was always waiting for her to fail. They learned to communicate differently. To say "I feel" instead of "you" always. To ask for what they needed instead of expecting the other person to read their minds. To sit with discomfort instead of running from it. It was hard. Some sessions ended with both of them in tears. Some sessions ended with more questions than answers. But they kept showing up. 6 months after that rainy night, Mercer drove to Connecticut. He didn't tell Tavlin where he was going. This was something he needed to do alone. Judith Holloway answered the door with surprise evident on her elegant features. "Mercer, I wasn't expecting you. Come in, I'll have Margaret prepare—" "No." His voice was firm. "We're going to talk, and it's going to happen right here." They stood on the porch of her colonial estate, mother and son, surrounded by perfectly manicured gardens. "You planted seeds of doubt in my head," Mercer said, "and I let them grow. I let your fear become my fear. I let your past poison my future. And because of that, I destroyed the best thing that ever happened to me." Judith opened her mouth to respond, but Mercer held up a hand. "I'm not finished. I lost 18 months with my son because I was too afraid to trust the woman who loved me. Tavlin carried our child alone. She gave birth alone. She did everything alone because I was too broken to see what was right in front of me. That ends now. Darling, I was only trying to protect you." "No, you were trying to protect yourself. You were trying to make sure I didn't get hurt the way you did. But in doing that, you made sure I would hurt in exactly the same way." His voice softened, but remained steady. "I love you, Mom, but Tavlin and Lennox are my family. If you can't respect her, if you can't genuinely welcome her and treat her with the dignity she deserves, then you won't be a part of our lives. The choice is yours." Judith stared at her son, as if seeing him clearly for the first time in years. "You really love her," she whispered. More than anything, Judith was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was small. "I almost cost you everything, didn't I?" "Yes," she nodded slowly, tears gathering in her eyes. "Then I suppose I have my own apologies to make." Judith's transformation wasn't instant, but she began the work. She started her own therapy. She wrote Tavlin a letter, not excusing her behavior, but acknowledging it and asking for the opportunity to do better. Slowly, carefully, she began to earn her place in her grandson's life. Lennox took his first steps on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Tavlin and Mercer were both in the living room, Tavlin sitting on the floor with her arms extended, Mercer standing a few feet away. They'd been practicing this for weeks, encouraging Lennox to walk the short distance between them. "Come on, little man," Mercer said, crouching down. You can do it. Come to Daddy. Lennox stood on wobbly legs, holding onto the coffee table for support. His face was scrunched in concentration, that stubborn chin that he'd inherited from both his parents set in determination. He let go of the table. 1 step, wobbling like a tiny drunk person. 2 steps, arms out for balance. 3 steps, 4. He crashed into Mercer's waiting arms with a triumphant squeal. Both parents were crying. Happy tears this time. Tears of joy and pride and overwhelming love. Did you see that? Tavlin laughed through her tears. Did you see him? He's a genius, Mercer declared, lifting Lennox into the air. Obviously the most advanced child who has ever lived. 2 weeks later, Lennox said his second word, Mama. Tavlin had been waiting for it, hoping for it, since that night when Dada had been his first. When she heard it, she burst into tears and pulled her son into her arms. That's right, baby. Mama's here. Mama loves you so much. Lennox patted her face, then looked over at Mercer with those serious grey eyes. Dada, stay. The question froze both adults. Mercer crossed the room and knelt beside them. Always, little man. Daddy's staying forever. I promise you, forever, Lennox repeated, testing the word. Forever, Mercer confirmed. The health scare came when Lennox was 14 months old. A fever that spiked to 104 degrees and wouldn't come down. A rash that appeared within hours. A baby who was usually so active, lying listless and unresponsive. Tavlin called Mercer, her voice shaking with terror. Something's wrong. I'm taking him to the emergency room. I'm on my way. They met at the hospital, and for 6 hours they sat in a waiting room that smelled of antiseptic and fear. Doctors ran tests, nurses took vitals, medical terminology was thrown around that neither of them fully understood. At some point, Mercer reached for Tavlin's hand. She didn't pull away. They sat there, fingers interlaced, 2 parents terrified of losing the child who had brought them back together. Lennox was diagnosed with roseola, scary but ultimately manageable. The fever broke within 24 hours. The rash faded over the next few days. But something had shifted during those hours in the waiting room. When you face the possibility of loss together, when you sit in that space where the worst could happen, you remember what really matters. And what mattered was this. They were a family. The first kiss happened 8 months after that rainy night. Tavlin was in the kitchen, washing dishes from lunch while Lennox napped in his room. Mercer was supposed to be leaving. He'd stopped by to drop off groceries and had stayed to help with the baby. But he found himself watching her instead, the way afternoon sunlight caught in her hair, the way she hummed softly while she worked, the way she built a life out of nothing and made it beautiful. Tavlin. She turned, drying her hands on a towel. Yeah? He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps, cupped her face in his hands, and kissed her. It was soft at first, tentative, questioning. Is this okay? Can we still have this? Tavlin answered by kissing him back. Soft became urgent. Tentative became desperate. Questioning became certainty. This was what it felt like to come home. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Tavlin pressed her forehead against his. We're taking this slow, she whispered. As slow as you need. I mean it, Mercer. I'm terrified. I know. Me too. And they did take it slow. They dated like they should have from the beginning, learning each other. Again, discovering who they'd become through the pain and the healing. They went to dinner. They took walks in the park with Lennox. They stayed up late, talking about their fears and their hopes. They fell in love with the new versions of each other, versions that had been tested and broken and put back together stronger. When the media caught wind of their reunion, the articles were predictably invasive. But this time, Mercer shut it down publicly. He released a statement through his company, Tavlin Mitchell is my family. Any outlet that disrespects her disrespects me. You've been warned. Tavlin read the statement on her phone and felt something crack open in her chest. He was defending her, publicly, unequivocally. He had become the man she always knew he could be. Grandma Opal passed away peacefully 2 weeks before Christmas, surrounded by family. She had held on long enough to see Tavlin and Mercer find their way back to each other, long enough to hold her great-grandson and watch him grow. The day before she died, she asked to see Mercer alone. He sat beside her hospital bed, holding her fragile hand in his. "You came back," she whispered. "Yes, ma'am. You did the work. I'm still doing it. Every day," she smiled. "Take care of my girls. Always. I promise you." "Good." She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had left. "That's all I needed to hear." At her funeral, Mercer stood beside Tavlin, holding Lennox in his arms while she cried. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't offer empty platitudes. He just stood there, present, steady, solid, exactly where he had promised to be. The happiness they built was not the easy kind that comes from luck or circumstance. It was the kind earned through hard work, through arguments that got resolved instead of causing destruction, through trust that was earned one day at a time, not assumed or demanded. Their love was stronger because it had been broken, deeper because it had been tested, real because it had survived. 1 year after that rainy Wednesday night, Mercer Holloway stood in a jewelry store in downtown Atlanta, staring at a collection of engagement rings that cost more than most people's houses. None of them felt right. The jeweler, a patient man named Richard, who had dealt with anxious clients for 30 years, watched him carefully. "May I make a suggestion, Mr. Holloway? Please, you keep looking at the rings, but you're not seeing them. What are you actually looking for?" Mercer was quiet for a moment. "Meaning. I'm looking for something that means something." Richard smiled. "Then perhaps we should start there. Tell me about her." So Mercer did. He told this stranger about Tavlin, about her strength, her grace, her fierce independence. He told him about Grandma Opal, the woman who had raised her, who had passed away but whose wisdom still guided them both. Richard disappeared into the back of the store. When he returned, he carried a small velvet box. "We can create something custom," he said. "And if you have a stone that holds significance, perhaps something that belonged to someone important, we can incorporate it into the design." Mercer thought of the small wooden box Tavlin kept on her dresser, the one that held Grandma Opal's few pieces of jewelry, including a ring with a small sapphire that Opal had worn every day of her life. He made a phone call. Denise answered. "I need your help with something," Mercer said, "and I need you to keep it a secret." The proposal happened on a quiet Sunday evening, exactly 1 year after Lennox had spoken his first word. Tavlin thought it was just another normal night. Mercer had come over for dinner, something he did most nights now. They'd eaten together as a family, given Lennox a bath, read him his favorite story about a bear who loved the moon. Now Lennox was asleep in his crib, his curly hair damp from the bath, his little chest rising and falling with peaceful breathing. "Come here," Mercer said softly, taking Tavlin's hand. "I want to show you something." He led her to the nursery, to the exact spot where everything had changed a year ago, where their son had looked at a stranger and recognized his father, where broken things had begun to heal. The room was lit only by the soft glow of the nightlight, a moon that projected, stars across the ceiling, the same one that had been there that rainy night. Mercer turned to face Tavlin, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. "Mercer, what?" He lowered himself to one knee. Tavlin's hands flew to her mouth. "I don't deserve you," Mercer began, his voice thick with emotion. "I know that. I destroyed your trust. I failed you in ways I'm still discovering. I let fear make me cruel, and I lost the best thing that ever happened to me." Tears were already streaming down Tavlin's face. "But you gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. You let me be a father to our son. You let me prove that I could change, that I could do the work, that I could become someone worthy of the love you once gave me." He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. The ring was stunning, but not in the ostentatious way of the ones he'd first looked at. It was elegant and timeless, with a band of white gold and a setting that held 2 stones, a diamond, and nestled beside it, a small sapphire that Tavlin recognized instantly. "That's Grandma Opal's stone," she whispered. Your mother gave it to me. She said Opal would have wanted you to carry a piece of her into your next chapter. Tavlin was crying too hard to speak now. I love you more than I knew I was capable of loving anyone, Mercer continued. You and Lennox, you're my whole world. You're my redemption. You're the reason I became a man I can be proud of. Please, Tavlin, please let me spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that. Marry me. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the soft music from Lennox's mobile and Tavlin's quiet sobs. Then she nodded. Yes. Yes? Yes. She laughed through her tears. Yes, Mercer. Yes. He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, as if it had always belonged there. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her with everything he had. A sound from the crib made them both turn. Lennox was awake, standing with his hands gripping the bars, his grey eyes bright with curiosity. He'd been watching them. When he saw his parents looking at him, his face split into the biggest grin they'd ever seen. He started clapping his small hands together. Mama, Dada, happy. Both parents laughed, their tears turning from emotional to joyful. Mercer lifted Lennox from the crib and pulled Tavlin close, the three of them wrapped in an embrace in the same spot where everything had changed. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and worth every moment of pain it had taken to get here. The wedding happened 3 months later. It was small, just 30 people in the backyard of their new home, the one they'd bought together in a neighborhood where Lennox could grow up with a tire swing and a treehouse and parents who loved him more than anything in the world. Tavlin walked down an aisle of rose petals carrying a bouquet of white peonies. Tucked inside the flowers, visible only to her, was a small photograph of Grandma Opal. You were right about him, Tavlin thought. He came back. He did the work. Mercer stood at the altar with Lennox in his arms, their son dressed in a tiny suit, serving as the world's youngest best man. When Tavlin reached them, Lennox reached for her, and she took him, holding their son between them as they exchanged vows. I promise to trust you, Mercer said, to believe in you, to never let fear make me forget how lucky I am to be loved by you. I promise to let you in, Tavlin replied, to forgive while still honoring my boundaries, to build a life with you based on who we are now, not who we were. They kissed as husband and wife while Lennox squealed with delight and their small gathering erupted in applause. Denise cried. Even Judith, who had done her own work over the past year, dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. It was a new beginning, for all of them. 5 years later, Mercer Holloway still sometimes stood in the doorway of his children's bedroom. Yes, children, plural, because Lennox now had a little sister named Opal, and watched them sleep. The house in Riverside Heights had been sold years ago. They'd moved to a home with more space, a backyard where Lennox could play soccer, a porch swing where Tavlin could drink her morning coffee, rooms filled with laughter and chaos and the beautiful mess of family life. Mercer had stepped back from the day-to-day operations of his company, promoting his business partner to CEO while he took a position that allowed him to be present for school pickups and soccer games and the million tiny moments that make up a childhood. Tavlin had launched her consulting business, the one she'd always dreamed of, and it was thriving. She was brilliant at what she did, and the industry had finally recognized what Mercer had always known. They still went to therapy, not because things were broken, but because they were committed to keeping them whole. On quiet nights, when the children were asleep and the house was still, Mercer would remember that rainy Wednesday night, the anger he'd felt, the arguments he'd planned, the confrontation he'd expected. And then he'd remember a 9-month-old baby speaking his first word, Dada. Everything had changed in that moment. The trajectory of his entire life had shifted because a child he'd never held recognized something in him that he hadn't yet recognized in himself. The capacity to change, to grow, to become better. Love doesn't keep score. It doesn't demand perfection. But it does ask that we try, again and again and again, until the trying becomes the story of our lives. And what a beautiful story it turned out to be. Story Vault family, if this journey touched your heart, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button if you believe in second chances. If you believe that people can change, that love can heal, that broken things can be made whole again, drop a comment below with just one word, one single word that describes what this story made you feel. Was it hope? Redemption? Healing? Whatever it is, I want to hear it. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change. Someone who's carrying wounds from their past. Someone who's afraid to be vulnerable. Someone who needs to know that the work is worth it. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Mr. Roman's Story Vault and hit that notification bell, because every week I bring you stories like this. Stories that entertain, yes, but also inspire and uplift and remind us of what's possible when we choose love over fear. Now, here's my question for you, and I really want you to answer this in the comments. Have you ever been given a second chance you didn't think you deserved? Or have you ever given someone a second chance that changed everything? Drop your story below. I read every single comment, and your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of Mercer and Tavlin's story. Thank you for being part of this community. Thank you for believing that stories matter, that words have power, and that we all deserve the chance to become better versions of ourselves. Until next time, remember this: every ending is just a new beginning waiting to unfold. The question is not whether you've made mistakes. We all have. The question is whether you're willing to do the work to become the person your loved ones deserve. This is Mr. Roman, and I'll see you in the next story.